Let's just start right here. Big plan, a lot of detail we need to work through. I want to start with a simple one. Help me understand how you'll measure success. Beyond just big terms like closing the gap, closing the K, how will you measure success specifically in the years to come?
Well, look, it's good to be with you guys. We have a major infrastructure problem in the United States. We're 13th globally when it comes to our physical infrastructure. Our roads are in bad need of repair. The typical person pays $1,000 in extra cost in wasted time and fuel. And if you think about modern infrastructure like broadband, 1 in 3 households in rural areas of the country can't even access high-speed internet. This is all holding our economy back. So as we think about coming out of this crisis and rebuilding and building back better, as the president said, we need to train our focus on a big, bold, but also practical investment in America. And that's what the president's going to talk about today. The American Jobs Plan is a historic capital investment in America. And our metric of success will be, can we make a generational investment, improve these things that matter to people's lives, the way they commute, the way they interact with their loved ones, the way they work, and do so in a way that actually creates millions of jobs in the process. So that's the goal. That's what the president will be talking about today, and that's where we'll be kicking off the legislative process.
This, of course, is public sector investment. We need to talk about private sector investment as well, and many people will be asking, Brian, how raising the corporate tax rate as we come out of a crisis actually helps develop private investment in America.
Well, look, you talk about private investment, and I do want to just make an important point. These public investments are among the highest return investments in terms of spurring private investments. So we know public investments in airports return several dollars in private investments. Public investments in basic R&D provide the backbone for innovation off which private investment flows. So we know these are the kinds of high-value investments that can spur the kind of private investment we need. We also think it's a reasonable thing to look at how to cover the cost of that capital investment over the long term. That's where the president's proposal comes in. Corporate tax reform. Let's end the race to the bottom internationally. Let's have a competitive tax system that encourages domestic investment and do so in a way that over 15 years would raise sufficient revenue to cover this plan.
Brian Deese, you will be in Pittsburgh. That is in the vicinity of Connor Lamb's 17th Congressional District. You need Connor Lamb's vote to get this done. How are you going to amend, adjust, establish the taxes to pay for this so that Mr. Lamb can be reelected?
Look, in districts like that and all around the country, people see and feel why we need this investment.
Yes.
Bridges are crumbling. Schools are crumbling. There are 400,000 schools, including in that district, where kids are drinking water from lead pipes.
Okay, but how are you going to do the taxes? Brian, tell me how Connor Lamb is going to vote for this, given the tax hesitancy from sea to shining sea.
Here's what I would say. You look at the 2017 tax cut that passed without a single Democratic vote. It was bad tax policy. It's encouraged more profits and production to actually move overseas, and it's deeply unpopular. What we're saying is we can do better than that. We can create a competitive tax code, we can raise revenue, and we can invest in things that really matter to the American people. And so that's the basics of this. The corporate tax reforms that we're talking about here would still leave the corporate rate lower than any year since World War II, other than the last couple of years in the wake of the Trump tax cut. So we're talking about years reasonable and practical, and the investments would really change the game for families in places like Western Pennsylvania.
Brian, there's a radical economic sea change under what you're talking about. This idea that in the past there was a popular belief that the private sector was way more efficient than the public sector. It was the way to generate growth. This proposal questions that, basically saying it needs to come from the government. Yes, it's infrastructure, but it's a lot of other programs as well. What evidence are you pointing to that public investing can be perhaps as efficient or more efficient in generating growth and pushing this economy ahead?
Look, at the end of the day, the private investment is what drives the economy forward. But at core, if we look back to great periods where America has done great things, whether it's the building of the interstate highway system or the space race in the 1960s, well-designed public investment can spur innovation, it can spur productivity, and it can spur job growth all around America. We know that's true in things like basic research. We know it's true in things like physical infrastructure. And the issue is that for 40 years, we have undermined those basic drivers of economic growth. So this isn't about the public versus the private sector. This is about public sector investments that we know will actually generate job growth. We know will help spur innovation across the economy. And we have done before as a country. This is not new. It's just that we haven't done it in quite some time, and we need to do it at historic scale. Something
we haven't discussed so far this morning, Brian, is state and local tax deductions. Can we sit on that just for a moment? There are 3 House Democrats basically saying we say no salt, no deal. What's your message for them this morning?
Look, the president's going to put out his plan today. He's going to talk about why we need these investments, and he's going to talk about some of his ideas on how to pay for it. He is eager, and we are eager now, to hear from everyone about their ideas. There's a lot of people who are going to have ideas about how to structure those investments. People are going to have ideas about how to pay for this. Some people may argue that we don't need to pay for portions of this. That's the conversation that we need to move forward here. What the president is going to be clear is that he wants input from Republicans and Democrats alike. We want to find practical ways to move this forward, but these are investments that we cannot afford not to make. That's the message you'll hear from the president.
Brian,
today.
You understand from the Republican side, they don't feel like you want their input whatsoever. They were invited to the White House for the last $1.9 trillion bill. They don't feel like they were listened to. Are you just saying that, or do you actually hear something from the Republican side you'd like to include? And if so, what is it?
This issue of infrastructure, I think, creates a unique opportunity for us to do work together and find common ground solutions. This is an issue that for years, you all know you've been covering it, Democrats and Republicans, the business community, the labor community have all been saying, can't we come together and do something big on America's infrastructure? This has been happening for years. We've been saying this, but we haven't actually done it. We believe this is a unique opportunity. This is a moment, and we are absolutely committed to the idea that we want to bring people together, hear their ideas, and find a way forward.
Brian, I want you to speak to the nation now. And frankly, Brian, I'm worried about those lousy bridges on Route 7 up by Middlebury in Vermont. But Brian, I want you to speak about this, how far behind we are in internet and fast internet for our children learning across America. Is this bill today going to solve that problem?
Look, this crisis has exposed just how vulnerable we are as a country to the fact that we don't have the basic infrastructure backbone of the 21st century. We don't have high-speed, reliable internet for everyone. You know, there are kids around the country who are sitting in McDonald's parking lots so they can get online to try to
What are we going to do about it, Brian? What's
in
this bill today that's going to fix the McDonald's parking lot, that take my kid to Starbucks reality we see in the island of Manhattan?
Absolutely. This bill is going to commit $100 billion to get the goal of 100% access to affordable broadband in this decade. It'll do it by building out the physical elements we need, particularly in rural and remote areas, and it'll do it by providing carrots and sticks to carriers to make sure that there are affordable plans available in every part of the country. We can do this in this decade. We need a one-time investment of public capital, which will spur enormous amounts of private capital and is also the right thing to do so that our kids and our families and our businesses can actually get into the 21st century economy.
Brian, this $2.25 trillion plan is thought of as a wish list as much as it is an outline for Biden's plans. How negotiable is this at this point? Where could we see it going in terms of the main non-negotiable points?
Well, I think if you go through this plan, every element of it reflects serious and thoughtful work that has been done over the course of years to identify where our gaps in our infrastructure exist and how we could actually invest to solve them, like the issue of broadband we were just talking about. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit down, we're ask people where do they see opportunity here and where can we move the ball forward. But what the president is going to be uncompromising about is to say this is a moment where we need to make a big capital investment in the country. Everybody recognizes that that's the case. The question is, can we actually get it done? That's what the president's going to be saying.
Brian, let's finish on this. $2.25 trillion. And in the White House statement, the great challenges of our time, the climate crisis and the ambitions of an autocratic China. I found the last line there just absolutely fascinating, the ambitions of an autocratic China. Can you spell out specifically to us how the challenges posed by the Chinese Communist Party have shaped this bill in front of us, this plan?
Well, one of the things the president's going to talk about today is that this moment is bigger. You mentioned earlier that the world is watching, that this is a moment where the question is, can democracy succeed in delivering for their people? And that's a question that a lot of people are asking all around the world. So part of what we're trying to do, or part of what the president's trying to do here, is to make clear what the stakes are. We are falling behind in R&D. We're falling behind in investment in supply chains and critical industries. But this is a moment where we can show that America can actually invest domestically in our own domestic strength in a way that will provide benefits to the world. We've already seen it with the rescue plan. We passed the rescue plan. We've seen increases in our own growth rate, but also spillovers in terms of demand for the world. That is the essential role that the American economy can play and American democracy can play in the world. We just have to show that we're up to the task.